My grandmother left me an inheritance, $300,000 to be exact. My uncles? They forged the will and smiled as they took everything from me. But what they didn't know is that my grandmother had hidden a safe, and inside it, she left exactly what I needed to expose their lie. My name is Sophia, and this is the story of how I fought against my own family and won. Grab your coffee and come with me. The smell of chamomile tea still lingered in the air as I walked into my grandmother's house for the last time, as her granddaughter, not her heir. The lace curtains filtered the morning light, casting delicate shadows on the worn-out rug. I was arranging her medications on the tray while listening, for what felt like the 1,000th time, to the stories of her youth, and yet somehow they always felt brand new. I was never there out of obligation. My love for her was quiet but immense, woven into those small routines no one else noticed or cared to. In those final months, time seemed to slow down, like the hands of the old clock she kept beside her bed. We'd sit for hours holding hands, while the radio softly played songs only she remembered. Sometimes she'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "You're my greatest pride." I'd smile, swallowing the lump in my throat. And my uncles? Silence. No calls. No visits. Their absence only made my presence more necessary, and now I realize more powerful. Until one morning she broke the pattern. She gripped my wrist tighter than I thought she still could, looked me straight in the eyes, that serene but resolute look, and whispered, "I left something for you. You deserve it." I exhaled, confused, but didn't press her. I simply tucked the sheet around her and smiled back, assuming it was just one of those cryptic things she'd been saying lately, mixing up memories and goodbyes. I had no idea what those words really meant, not yet. Less than a week later, she was gone. Her breath faded slowly, like a flame quietly extinguishing itself. I held her hand to the very end, feeling the warmth leave her body. Aunt Lucia, the only one of her children who was always around, sat quietly in the corner, crying softly. Together, we made all the arrangements for the funeral. I picked out her favorite flowers, laid out the light blue dress she always said matched her eyes. She deserves a beautiful farewell, worthy of someone so generous. I thought, my chest tight. At the funeral, my uncles showed up like they were clocking in for some bureaucratic task. Cold handshakes, rehearsed hugs, eyes that seemed to scan the room for valuables more than memories. Among the wreaths of flowers, I caught snippets of their conversations. Who's getting the house? Or, did she have any jewelry? I felt nauseous. How could they be so cold? How could they turn grief into calculation? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. Focus, I told myself. This is her farewell, not theirs. But the unease had already started to creep in. Her words came back to me like a stubborn whisper. I left something for you. What? My grandmother was never rich. She lived simply, almost frugally. She always used to say, the more you accumulate, the more you just gather dust. But what if she had actually left me something? The doubt began to grow inside me like an invisible root, wrapping itself tighter and tighter. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. It was intuition or maybe a calling. A few days later, the phone rang. The formal voice of the family attorney. We'd like you to come in for the reading of your grandmother's will. My heart raced, as if it already knew that what she'd said wasn't just a passing thought. I set the appointment and spent the next few days trying to keep myself busy, organizing the house, visiting Aunt Lucia. She sent me a short message. I'll be there too. I replied with just a heart emoji, but that silent promise comforted me. On the morning of the meeting, the sky was overcast like the whole world shared the weight I was carrying. I walked into the attorney's office with an icy knot in my stomach. Dark wooden furniture, the smell of old leather, books perfectly lined up on the shelves, everything there seemed designed for hard conversations. My uncles were all present, sitting side by side like a block of stone. I greeted Aunt Lucia with a discreet but firm handshake. She gave me a faint smile, a silent show of support. The attorney cleared his throat, opened the folder, and began reading with that monotone voice of someone who's done this hundreds of times. But what I heard knocked the wind out of me. All assets will be divided equally among the 4 children of the deceased. 4, not 5, not a granddaughter. 4. No mention of me, no acknowledgement of those words she'd told me, no recognition at all. My blood ran cold, and my head started pounding. I glanced at Aunt Lucia, who, under the table, squeezed my hand discreetly. And in that moment, without anyone having to say a word, I knew something was very, very wrong. The lawyer's pen scratched across the paper with a dry, final sound, as if sealing what he had just read. All assets will be divided equally among the 4 children of the deceased. The words hung in the air, heavy, cold, definitive. My uncles sat motionless, stone-faced, their eyes darting anywhere but at mine. They looked satisfied, or maybe relieved. Me, I felt the ground collapse beneath my feet. I furrowed my brow, searching for some kind of explanation, but their silence was as loud as the coldness of that will. My mind spun in circles, trying to make sense of it. Where was the part my grandmother mentioned? That something she told me I deserved? It couldn't have been just a delusion. She was clear, firm, like she always was. I took a deep breath, trying to fight the urge to interrupt. But I couldn't. My voice trembled as I broke the protocol. "Excuse me, are you sure there's nothing else? My grandmother, she spoke to me." The lawyer didn't even lift his eyes. "This is what's stated in the official document," he said, calmly turning the page. Before I could push further, my eldest uncle leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table with that familiar air of self-righteousness. "It was only fair. We're her children," he said, cold and calculated. The other 2 nodded silently, like a choir rehearsed over years. That line echoed inside me with a force that made me shiver. It was only fair. Fair? It didn't feel fair. Not after all the years I stood by her side while they barely even called. And yet, in that suffocating room, surrounded by those cold stares, I started doubting myself. The betrayal was crushing, but the doubt? Even worse. Had my grandmother changed her mind? Had she, in her final days, decided her children deserved more than the granddaughter who cared for her? I bit my lip, fighting back the tears. I stood up abruptly, not knowing where to go, just wanting to get out of that oppressive office, away from that scene where the absence of affection was colder than the air conditioning. I hurried down the hall, heart pounding, hands freezing. Then I felt a gentle hand grab my arm. I turned around and saw Aunt Lucia's tear-filled eyes. "I need to talk to you alone," she said, her voice muffled. I nodded without thinking and followed her to a small garden at the back of the building. The fresh air felt like a relief, but the weight in my chest stayed the same. She ran her hand through her hair, took a deep breath, and stood there for a few seconds, like she was gathering the courage to say something she'd been holding on to for far too long. Finally, she looked me straight in the eyes and let it out, with the strength of someone who could no longer carry that burden. "They forged it." My whole body went cold. "My mother left you $300,000. She told me. She showed me the will. I saw it." I shut my eyes, as if not seeing could somehow protect me from that brutal truth. The betrayal now had a name, a shape, and blood. How could they? Wasn't it enough that they inherited everything they were entitled to? They had to rip away the one thing my grandmother wanted to leave me as her final gesture of love? My voice barely made it out. But how? How can I prove it? Aunt Lucia took another deep breath, wringing her hands together, like someone about to cross a dangerous bridge. Then she revealed, "There's a safe at Mom's house. Only the 2 of us know about it. Inside, she kept a copy of the real will and a recording." My eyes widened in disbelief. "A recording?" I repeated, my breath hitching. She nodded firmly. "Yes, she wanted to make sure that if anything went wrong, you'd be able to prove that she loved you and that she left this for you." The tears streamed down my face, unstoppable, not just for the possibility of justice, but for the certainty that my grandmother thought of me until the very end, that she cared about my safety even after she was gone. Aunt Lucia pulled me into a light hug, just like she used to when I was little and fell down or got hurt. I don't know what to do," I confessed, burying my face into her shoulder. She, with the same calm strength she'd always had, replied, "You're going to fight, and I'm going to help you." I left that garden breathing hard, but with my gaze steadier than ever. I had no idea how to open that safe, how to make it legal, or how to go up against 3 uncles capable of forging a will without the slightest bit of shame. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this slide. Sometimes the greatest legacy we inherit is the courage to refuse what others try to impose on us. For the first time since this all began, I felt like there was a path forward, and I realized I didn't have to keep quietly accepting what others decided for me. The creak of my grandmother's front gate sounded like a silent warning. From that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The day was overcast, and the smell of old wood mixed with the dust that had settled in the corners of her now empty house. Aunt Lucia and I walked side by side down the hallway I'd traveled so many times carrying trays of tea. But this time we carried something else, a purpose, to uncover the truth my grandmother had so wisely hidden. The day before, with Aunt Lucia's unwavering support, I sought out a lawyer who specialized in probate law. Helena greeted us with that calm, steady look of someone who's seen her share of family battles. She listened carefully without interrupting as we told her everything, from the care I gave my grandmother to the revelation about the safe. When we finished, she folded her hands on the desk and said, with the precision of someone who knows exactly what she's doing, "We need to act fast, but by the book." That felt like an anchor to me. Helena explained that to open the safe, we would need a court order. Without it, we could be accused of trespassing or even tampering with evidence, the exact opposite of what we wanted. Aunt Lucia confirmed everything and agreed to testify if necessary. Helena quickly drafted the petition, outlining the suspected fraud and the need for an official forensic inspection. Sometimes the truth needs more than just courage, it needs a method. Her words kept echoing in my mind. A few days later, we were at the courthouse. The judge, after hearing the case and reviewing the documents Helena submitted, authorized the opening of the safe, as long as it was done with a court officer and forensic expert present. When the ruling was read, my chest filled with relief, but immediately after, a chill ran down my spine. This was real now, no longer just a conversation in a garden or a family secret. It was now a legal action against 3 people who, until then, had been my blood. On the appointed morning, we returned to my grandmother's house, now transformed into the scene of a reckoning. The court officer and the forensic expert were already waiting at the door. With each step down the hallway, it felt like I wasn't just saying goodbye to the house, but to the girl who once believed that family meant protection. We reached her bedroom. Aunt Lucia knelt in front of the old wardrobe and, with trembling hands, slid aside the wooden panel hiding the safe. "She asked me never to tell, but now it's the right thing to do," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. The forensic expert examined the safe, confirming there were no signs of forced entry. In just a few minutes, with the proper tools, the safe clicked open, a sharp, final sound that echoed like the end of their entire charade. My heart raced. Inside, carefully arranged, were a brown envelope, a small voice recorder, and a few folded documents. Helena slipped on gloves, carefully removed the contents, and handed them to the court officer, who meticulously logged everything. We opened the envelope, and there it was. The original will, dated, signed, and notarized. The words leapt off the page. "To my granddaughter, who cared for me with love and devotion, I leave the amount of $300,000 as a token of gratitude and recognition." The tears came before I could stop them. It wasn't just a document, it was proof that my grandmother had thought of me until the very end. Proof that our love had endured despite distance, neglect, and betrayal. Helena switched on the small voice recorder, and then we heard her voice, weak but clear. "I leave to my granddaughter, who cared for me, what I can... $300,000. She deserves it. My children will already have their share. Don't touch this. Don't touch it." Her words sliced through the silence of the room like sharp blades, reaching every corner of that house. I closed my eyes, feeling her there, present, strong, determined, just as she always was. It wasn't just a will, it was a farewell and a command. Don't touch. With those pieces of evidence, Helena wasted no time. She immediately filed a lawsuit for will forgery, requesting that the false document presented by my uncles be annulled and that the original be validated. She also included a claim for damages, given their attempt to unjustly cut me out. I signed all the papers with a steady hand, knowing that from this point on, There was no room left for doubt or fear. When the truth comes to light, even the silence changes its tone. I left that house with one final glance at the empty bedroom, which now seemed smaller, quieter, but at the same time freer. The proof was there, but the fight was only just beginning. I knew my uncles wouldn't take this lightly. They'd hire the best lawyers, pull every trick to twist the truth. But now, I had something they didn't. My grandmother's trust and the courage to honor it, no matter what it cost. The sound of heels echoing off the marble floors of the courthouse was steady and precise, but inside me, everything was chaos. The smell of old paper and burnt coffee mixed with the thick tension in the air. My uncles were there, as always, aligned, cold, impenetrable, like a concrete wall about to crumble. Beside them, expensive, aggressive lawyers, ready to turn this hearing into a spectacle of distortions and attacks. I took a deep breath, adjusted the necklace my grandmother gave me, and walked to the front, with Aunt Lucia and Helena by my side. As soon as the hearing began, their lawyers went straight on the offensive. They claimed I was trying to take advantage of the situation, that the whole safe story was just an opportunistic invention, and that I never had any right to the inheritance. Just a sentimental granddaughter, I heard one of them say, smiling, as if he already knew how the game would end before it even began. I kept my gaze steady, but my heart was pounding like a war drum. They think money is worth more than memory, but they have no idea what it's worth to me. Then Helena stood up, not aggressively, but with the calm strength of someone who holds the truth. She walked to the bench and, one by one, laid out the evidence. The official copy of the will, authenticated and registered, the forensic report from the safe, and the recording of my grandmother's voice, clear and unmistakable, stating my rightful share and asking that no one touch it. Silence fell over the room as the audio played. She deserves it. Don't touch it. And in that instant, I saw my uncles' faces change, like they finally realized that this time the lie wouldn't be enough. The forensic report was decisive. It proved the will they had presented was fake, the signature forged, the date manipulated, and the document non-existent in any official records. The judge held up the report and, with a solemn voice, charged them. Forgery, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The scheme they had tried to pull over their own mother's memory now had a name and consequences. They didn't just forge a piece of paper, they forged the respect they owed to the one who raised them. The weight of that realization was almost physical. Then Aunt Lucia stood up. She straightened her jacket, took a deep breath, and walked to the center of the room. Her testimony was a mix of pain and dignity. She told how her siblings had plotted the forgery, how she refused to take part, and how, in the end, she revealed the safe to me. She spoke calmly, without bitterness, but with the strength of someone who chose truth, even knowing the cost. While she spoke, I couldn't hold back my tears. It was painful seeing it all laid bare, but it was necessary. Once again, she was my anchor. The defense began to crumble. All that remained were desperate attempts to attack my character. She manipulated the situation, they said. She made all this up to get money. But now it sounded hollow, pathetic. The evidence was solid, the forensic report irrefutable, Aunt Lucia's testimony unshakable. I watched in silence as the fortress they built with lies collapsed, brick by brick. When truth finds space, lies implode on their own. The judge then signaled he was preparing to rule. He called for final arguments. Helena was direct. My client seeks nothing more than respect for the deceased's wishes and restitution for the injustice she endured. I looked at her and gave a small, grateful smile. Meanwhile, my uncle's lawyers, who had once been so confident, now only repeated the same tired arguments, their voices cracking. The room was silent, tense, as if everyone knew the ending had already been written, just waiting to be spoken aloud. I left that hearing with my head held high. I hadn't won yet, but I knew I had done the right thing. For years, I had been the granddaughter who cared, who stayed silent, who accepted, but now I was the granddaughter who fought. Helena placed her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You did the right thing." I just nodded, unable to speak. This time, I wasn't just a granddaughter. I was the guardian of her memory. And in that moment, I realized, The love my grandmother left me was bigger than any amount of money. The judge informed us that the verdict would be delivered at the next hearing in 15 days, the time of a breath and of an eternity. We left the courtroom slowly, carrying that weight in our chests that only those who've been through a legal battle understand. My uncles left in silence, avoiding my gaze. Aunt Lucia and I hugged tightly, and for a long time. Now, there was nothing left to do but wait and trust. The courthouse clock struck exactly 9 a.m. as we pushed through those heavy doors. The air felt thicker, as if time itself had slowed down, weighed down by the tension. The sound of our footsteps in the empty hallway echoed like a silent countdown. I adjusted the collar of my blouse, trying to hide the chill running up my spine. At my side, Helena walked with her usual calm professionalism, and Aunt Lucia squeezed my hand discreetly as if to say, "We're in this together until the very end." My uncles were already there, sitting side by side, motionless, their eyes fixed on some random spot on the wall, avoiding any eye contact. For the first time, they seemed smaller, like people who already knew they'd lost, but weren't ready to admit it. I sat in the front row, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes for a moment, remembering my grandmother's voice. "You deserve it." Those words now carried the weight of a promise about to be fulfilled. Justice doesn't erase the pain, but it gives it a name. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The room was dead silent, broken only by the sound of him flipping through the pages, searching for the verdict. He began with a sober statement about the importance of honoring the wishes of the deceased and protecting the rights of victims in cases of family fraud. He said he had reviewed all the evidence, the forensic reports, and the testimonies, and that his decision was clear. My heart pounded, so hard I could swear everyone could hear it. I gripped Helena's hand and waited. Then he announced, "The will presented by my uncles was void. Forged, manipulated, criminal. On the other hand, the will found in the safe, with its authenticated copy and my grandmother's recording, was validated and officially recognized." He ordered that the $300,000 be transferred in full to me, as per her express wishes. I felt the air rush into my lungs, like I was breathing for the first time in months. I closed my eyes and smiled quietly. It was never about the money, it never was. The judge continued firmly. In addition to returning the funds, he ordered my uncles to pay me $100,000 in damages, acknowledging the suffering and humiliation I had endured. They were also responsible for covering all of my legal fees. I looked at Helena, who just nodded, with that quiet smile of someone who knows they've fulfilled their mission. When you have the truth on your side, no price can compare to the dignity you regain. The relief was immense, but there was still one more part. And then it came. My uncles were held criminally liable. Forgery, fraud, criminal conspiracy. The judge was unequivocal. The attempt to defraud the wishes of the deceased and harm a rightful heir will not be tolerated. I watched their faces turn pale, their shoulders, once squared, now hunched under the weight of their own guilt. I didn't feel pleasure, just justice. The justice my grandmother deserved and that I had fought so hard to achieve. The judge closed the hearing with one final sentence. "Justice has been served." I stood there, frozen, letting those words reverberate inside me. Helena placed her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "It's over." I just nodded, unable to reply. Aunt Lucia pulled me into a tight, silent hug, full of everything that words could never quite express. We left the room slowly, as my uncles exited through the opposite door, avoiding our eyes. As I reached the courthouse steps, I paused for a second. The sky was clear, and the sun was just beginning to warm the chilly morning. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let it out slowly. Justice had been served. Not as a trophy, but as a possible new beginning. I looked at Aunt Lucia and smiled. I looked at Helena and whispered my thanks. Then I looked at myself, reflected in the glass door, and I recognized someone stronger than I ever thought I could be. Justice didn't give me everything, but it gave me back myself. As I walked down the steps, I could feel the weight lifting, step by step. The memory of my grandmother walked with me, silent, but always present. There was no euphoria, no revenge, just the quiet certainty that her wishes had been honored, that my fight had been worth it. And for the first time in a long time, I could move forward, light, whole, free, The sound of the ATM keys clicking felt like a final punctuation mark to my journey. The numbers popped up on the screen. The inheritance, the damages, the legal reimbursements, and with them, a quiet sense of closure. I took a deep breath, tucked the receipt into my purse, and walked out, not just leaving the bank, but leaving behind the weight I had carried for months. The street moved on at its usual indifferent pace, but inside me, everything was finally, silently in order. Justice isn't a spectacle, it's peace. With the money, I did what my grandmother always taught me. I saved it. I opened a modest, secure savings account just like she would have done. Her words echoed in my mind. Always save, you never know what tomorrow might bring. There were no impulsive purchases, no extravagant trips, just a quiet commitment to security and to her memory. In that simple gesture, I felt like I was honoring her once again, the woman who taught me to have roots long before I ever had wings. That same afternoon, I sent Aunt Lucia a bouquet of sunflowers, my grandmother's favorite flowers. On the card, I wrote just a few words. Thank you for being the voice of truth when I needed it most. She replied with her usual sobriety. Your grandmother would be proud. I smiled as I read it, tucking the message away with the last letters my grandmother had ever written to me. Some bonds grow stronger in the midst of ruin, and they bloom. My life, from then on, quietly restarted. No fanfare, no public celebrations, just the lightness of someone who no longer needs to explain herself. I distanced myself from the courts, from tense hearings, and from forced family gatherings. Silence now wasn't absence, it was a choice. Free from injustice, free from manipulation, and most of all, free from the need to prove my worth to those who never saw it. I kept my distance from my uncles. Not out of resentment, I refused to carry that weight, but out of wisdom. I realized that protecting my peace was more important than trying to fix relationships that had always been fragile and self-serving. Surrounding myself with people who respect me, who choose me, that was the most mature decision I ever made. And through it all, I learned. Blood doesn't define character, choices do. I started visiting my grandmother's grave often, always bringing sunflowers. I'd sit there quietly at the edge of the bench, watching the wind play with the petals. Sometimes I'd talk to her, telling her about my day, about how much lighter life felt now. I never expected answers, but I always left feeling like I'd been heard. Some loves endure absence because they never needed presence to exist. There were no big epiphanies, just the calm realization that justice had been done. I didn't need revenge or to prove anything to anyone, just to honor what was mine, both by right and by love. My grandmother trusted me, and I didn't let her down. Now it was time to move on, leaving the past where it belongs, and opening myself up to everything I can still be and build. Before I left the courthouse that last day, I did something my grandmother always did when she finished something important. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and exhaled slowly like sealing a chapter. I reached into my bag, pulled out the handkerchief she had given me, the one with her initials embroidered, and left it on the bench in the square, right beside the courthouse. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, head held high, with a quiet smile on my lips. Not every inheritance is money. Sometimes it's the courage to keep going. And that was it. A simple, just quiet new beginning, completely my own. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And if you'd like to help me keep telling these stories, you can buy me a coffee. The link is in the first pinned comment. Every cup helps me keep bringing more stories to you.